Imagine walking across the plains of northern India nearly 200 years ago. The morning sun has just begun to rise. A cool breeze moves gently across the fields. Birds drift silently overhead. Everything feels peaceful. Then, you stop. Standing before you is something almost impossible to believe, an enormous wall, not built from stone, not built from brick, but made from millions of living thorn bushes, taller than a man, so dense that even sunlight struggled to pass through, and stretching farther than the eye could see. This wasn't a fortress. It wasn't built to stop invading armies. It wasn't protecting a king or defending a city. Instead, it quietly crossed rivers, forests, farms, and villages. At its greatest extent, this living barrier stretched for nearly 4,000 kilometers, longer than many of the world's most famous walls. Yet today, almost nobody remembers it. There are no famous ruins, no crowds of tourists, no towering monuments, only scattered records, forgotten maps, and the faint traces of one of history's strangest engineering projects. It was called the Great Hedge of India. But why would anyone build one of the longest living barriers in human history? The answer wasn't gold. It wasn't diamonds. It wasn't land. It was something so ordinary that most of us never think about it. Salt. Today, salt is one of the cheapest things we can buy. It sits quietly on every dining table. We sprinkle it onto our food without a second thought. But 200 years ago, salt meant survival. It preserved food long before refrigeration. Workers depended on it after long days beneath the hot Indian sun. Families relied on it every single day. Rich or poor, everyone needed salt. And whenever something becomes essential, someone will eventually try to control it. During the 19th century, British colonial authorities realized that taxing salt could generate enormous amounts of revenue. But there was one problem. People kept avoiding the tax. Merchants found hidden routes. Villagers traded with one another beyond the reach of customs officers. Smugglers carried salt through forests and across open countryside. Stopping them seemed almost impossible. So British officials came up with an extraordinary solution. Instead of guarding every road, they would reshape the landscape itself. Surveyors crossed northern India, measuring fields, rivers, and villages. Workers planted thousands upon thousands of thorn bushes. Year after year, they watered them, trimmed them, and carefully wove the branches together. Slowly, separate plants became one continuous living barrier. As the years passed, the hedge grew taller, thicker, stronger. Some sections rose higher than a man. Others became so dense that forcing your way through was nearly impossible. Seen from above, the scale was astonishing. The hedge crossed rivers, forests, farms, and villages, becoming one of the longest living structures ever created by human hands. But a living wall could not survive on its own. Thousands of workers maintained it every year. They trimmed branches, repaired damaged sections, and planted new shrubs wherever gaps appeared. The hedge itself became a never-ending construction project. Wooden customs gates were built along its length. Every merchant, every farmer, every traveler had to stop. Bullock carts loaded with sacks of salt rolled slowly toward the checkpoints. British customs officers inspected every cart, every basket, every bundle. Nothing crossed without permission. Taxes were collected. Payments were recorded in thick leather ledgers. For the colonial administration, the hedge was more than a barrier. It was a machine designed to collect revenue. Day after day, long lines formed outside the customs gates. For millions of people, there was simply no easy way around it. To the British authorities, the hedge was an administrative tool. But for the people living beside it, it became part of everyday life. Children grew up in its shadow. Farmers worked beside it. Travelers followed it for miles, wondering where it finally ended. Not everyone accepted the new rules. After sunset, smugglers slipped quietly through fields, carrying small sacks of salt beneath the cover of darkness. Every journey carried risk. British patrols rode slowly along the hedge, watching, waiting. searching for anyone willing to break the law. Whenever illegal salt was discovered, it was confiscated. For one family, it meant losing valuable income. For the government, it meant protecting tax revenue. Seen from the sky, the hedge looked almost endless, a green ribbon winding across northern India, crossing rivers, forests, villages, open countryside, all built because of something as simple as salt. At every customs gate, the same routine repeated itself. Carts stopped, officers searched, taxes were collected, records were written. For some, it was just another day's work. For others, it was another reminder of how difficult life had become. Then came the monsoon. Heavy rain flooded the roads, rivers overflowed, mud covered the countryside. Yet workers continued repairing the hedge, making sure the living barrier survived another season. Months later, the dry season returned. Dust drifted across the roads. Heat shimmered above the fields. The hedge continued growing quietly while life carried on around it. For children, it was simply part of the landscape. For parents, it represented inspections, delays, and taxes. The living wall shaped everyday life in ways both large and small. Yet despite its enormous size, the hedge remained surprisingly fragile. Without constant care, branches died. Gaps appeared. Nature was always trying to reclaim what people had built. Thousands of workers spent decades trimming, weaving, and repairing the hedge. It was alive, always growing, always changing, always demanding attention. Looking closely, the hedge was intimidating. Dense branches locked tightly together. Long thorns guarded every opening. Crossing it was possible, but rarely easy. Across northern India, the living barrier became one of the largest man-made structures on Earth. Yet, unlike a stone wall, it breathed, it grew, it changed with every season. But no empire lasts forever. Governments change, policies change. Even the greatest engineering projects eventually lose their purpose. By the late 19th century, the salt customs system was changing. The enormous hedge was no longer needed. Without maintenance, the living wall slowly began to fade. Branches withered. Paths disappeared beneath tall grass. Nature quietly reclaimed what people had spent decades creating. The hedge did not vanish overnight. It disappeared one season at a time. Villages expanded, roads were rebuilt, fields replaced abandoned customs stations, birds nested where officers once patrolled. Trees grew where thorn bushes had once formed an impenetrable barrier. Today, if you travel across the same countryside, you won't find a giant living wall. You'll find peaceful villages, green fields, quiet roads. Only history remembers what once stood there. It is difficult to imagine that one of the longest barriers ever built by people could almost disappear without a trace. No famous ruins, no towering monuments, only forgotten records and faded maps remain. The Great Hedge of India was never built to defend a kingdom. It never stood against invading armies. It existed because governments wanted to control one of life's most essential resources, salt. And from that simple idea grew one of the most extraordinary living structures in human history. Today, the hedge is gone, but its story remains. A reminder that history is not only shaped by kings and battles. Sometimes it is shaped by ordinary things. A handful of salt, a line of thorn bushes, and millions of lives forever changed. Perhaps history's greatest mysteries are not the things we have lost, but the things we simply forgot to remember.